let's start out with just talking a little bit about yesterday when I wanted to show you guys the test, or sorry, the new method we made, this one update product. We made a new inside the index. Yesterday I created this, Monday I created this method right here, and that didn't actually work. I couldn't upload it. So my functions were broken somehow, and I figured out why. And I want to show you guys because I feel that as you start adding tests, you'll probably get the same issue yourselves because of the way that you have to set up your code in order to make tests. Before we do it, I just want to show you that this is actually running now. I made this function, if you guys can't remember, what it should do is pretty much it listens for top products. And when a new top product is updated, what it's going to do is it's going to update that top product and actually rename. Let me try and go into the controller right here. Again, the controller didn't do anything right now. It just converted everything like we talked about yesterday. And again, all of this is in the video if you want to check it out again. And then we ended up pretty much all I'm doing is I'm taking the current name of the product and just uppercasing everything just to show that I could do something, right? And that uppercase goes in and then rewrites the name. And then, of course, you can see that in the database. So let's just try and do that inside the view right here. So I'll go to my database and I'll try to go to products. As soon as I update a product right here, the first trigger is going to happen because now I actually have two functions working together. And you have to be aware of that because sometimes you might end up having loops or something like that. But still, I'm going to take my chance right here. Because what's actually going to happen is when I update a product, I'm going to hit this function. It's going to count up the times purchased. And then it's actually going to set the products. And this is actually the top products. So it's actually going to update top products. When that update happens, this function is going to be triggered. And then that's actually going to rename it to uppercase, right? So it's going to be two different functions working together. Let me show you because luckily it's moving so slow that you can actually see it. So let's go into products again and update this guy. So I'll write hair special 44. I'll say update. If I jump to the top products right here, you'll notice that two updates happen. There's the first one. Now it's actually renamed. And there's the second one where it actually updates to uppercase. I don't know if you saw that, so I'll just try again. And you have to notice that it gets two different updates. So first, it actually updates the name because of this trigger. And then afterwards, oh, I didn't even make it. It's just too fast. Let me just try one more time. Update. There's the first one, and there's the second one. So again, you'll notice that we get the two updates because I now have two functions working and listening on two different triggers. Again, the first trigger is when I update the product right here. That's going to trigger and actually update the top product in here. And the second trigger is when this is updated, it actually renames this guy. Now I could do all of that in one function. So it's not something I need two functions to do, but I just want to show it. And again, if we go into our index.ts file, which is where everything starts, you'll notice that these two functions right here is actually what starts everything. And again, the first function I did is this one that pretty much just listens for any updates to the products collection, right? That's why we hit the first trigger. And when that trigger happens, that was the one we talked about Monday. It goes in and it kind of hits this controller function. The controller function ends up in this service right here. And this service updates the product and count times 1, right? And then it updates that top product, which is the other collection. And you can see that again, if you go to the repository, you can see that I'm actually talking to the top products right here, not the products. And that's why that's the one I'm setting, set top products. That's why I'm updating that one. And then the second trigger happens because now top products has been updated. So I go back to the index file and now this trigger is going to happen because now something new happened to the top products. It got updated. And we go to the controller again. We call the update top products, this guy. Now he redirects itself to this one, the repository, the service. And then the service goes in again and uppercases the name. And then it sets the top products the second time. And that's why you see it like these two different events happening right here. So there we go, update There's the first one and the second one. So that runs, that works, happy days. But Monday I had a problem uploading this. I couldn't get my system to kind of comprehend that I had two different functions now instead of only one. I had an error when I tried to upload it, and I want to try and show you why. And in order to do that, we have to get an understanding about a few things. First of all, we need to understand what these tsconfig files are all about. And you also need to understand what your package.json file is all about. So, no questions. So let's start with the package.json file, because I know that most of you have already looked at this guy and have a basic understanding because you know something about the dependencies down here. I talked about that a few times. The dependencies is, again, just a way for you to inform the system whenever you run an npm install, what packages do you need for production environment and for development environment. That's what the package.json file does for you. The second thing the package.json file does for you is actually set up what node engine we should use. And this is because we could set up Node.js to, for instance, use one of the newest engines is 10. So I could go and use Node.js 10 instead of 8. Just getting a newer Node.js. You can do that actually, and it'll actually try and update it on Firebase. But you have to be aware, some system doesn't have the newest node, like Heroku might not have the newest Node.js available, then you have to kind of downgrade yourself to an older version of Node. It would be the same problem you would have with when we wrote C#. You noticed there was a package issue now and then because you guys used newer NuGet packages. You've tried that, so it's just version control right here. What Node.js engine should we use? What else do we have in here? We have something about Jest. This is something new I added, and you can pretty much go and copy paste it. It's just a way for me to kind of explain where's my testing libraries, how do I generate tests and stuff like that. So there's nothing exciting down here. It's just a setup of the Jest, which is of course the testing framework that we're using. And then when I go to the top right here, this is what I want to talk about. These are all the scripts. Again, I just touched them briefly last time, but these are actually all the scripts you can execute, right? So this is a way for you to write commands. And notice there's a lot of different commands right here. Oops, new participant. I'm just letting everybody join, so we might get some crazy people in here. I don't know if everybody's from the academy, but I guess they are. We have some crazy scripts right here, and each script, you can read what they're doing. This is actually what it's executing inside the command line, right? So if I run the lint command right here, I can do that by saying, I just have to move myself around again. There we go. I can do that by, if I want to run the lint command, I can write npm run and then the name of the command. And of course, you need to be in the right folder. Let me just try and show you something again, like I talked about Monday. If I'm inside the hairdresser salon functions folder right here, I'll actually, because there are two package.json files. That's just the way it's set up right now. I think I tried to figure out if I could remove it, but you can't do that right now with the way Firebase is set up. So you have to keep them both. But this package.json file is another one with different commands. You can have set it up in both areas, but you have to know there are two different areas, okay? You just have to know that. Okay. I'm not going to use this one because I configured everything inside this one. So I'm going to go one folder up into the functions folder, and that's where my package.json resides right here in the functions folder. Let me just close those down. I'm in the functions folder, and here's my package.json. That's where I put in my extra logic right here. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, if I run a command by saying npm run and then lint, it'll actually execute everything inside this command right here. So if I try to run this, you'll notice it executes pretty much the stuff, tslint, project, tsconfig build, that you see in here. Okay, that's all it's doing. So I could, in principle, I could do the same thing myself. I could just copy this and paste it in here, and it would run it, right? But here's the problem. tslint wasn't found because this guy actually sets up some information about where to find tslint and stuff like that. I could set all of that up, so it's not a problem. I could just set it up. Okay. The same with npm right here. If I do serve, let me try and say npm run serve like this. You'll notice again, it runs an npm command, run build watch, and all of this start function, blah, blah, blah. So it actually starts an emulator right here with this single command. Let me just shut it down again. So that's what you can do with your commands right here. And again, I don't care if you're working with, I think it's React pretty much used the same idea. Pretty much any framework you have that uses Node.js behind the scenes, you have these commands available because you have a package.json file available. Okay, so these are predefined shells commands that you can run. And it's pretty amazing because you can make your own. Now, when I showed you guys this last time, I didn't have this in here. Let me just try and remove it. When I run a build now, if I do an npm run build to kind of build my system like I tried to show you guys last time, let me actually just delete this lib folder right here. There we go. I'll run this command now. What actually happens is it builds my code using TSC, which is the way that TypeScript converts your TypeScript code into JavaScript code. So this is the compiler, right? TSC is a command to compile your code. So what happened is actually, if I open my lib right now, you'll notice I got two different folders in here, a source folder and a test folder. Now, first of all, I don't want the test folder in here when I do a build, because the build is for something I want to send to a production server, and it doesn't make sense to have a test server, test information inside my production code. That's not what you want. So I need to get rid of that. Now, of course, I could start manually saying, I don't need this guy. I'll just remove that. I need to move all of this one level out like this. I'll remove this guy. Yes, just do it. And I'll remove this. The source folder shouldn't be there, because in order for you to actually make this run, you need to explain to the system where your index.js file is. If you don't do that, your Firebase server can't execute your functions, right? So I would have to do that manually, because if you notice right here, there's also another thing in the package.json file that my Firebase function server uses, and that's where is my main execution file, where is the index.js file, and that's inside the lib index.js. So if I don't have access to that, I would fail. But of course, I could do something else. I could say my main file is going to be in source/index like this. But again, I would upload a lot of test data that I wouldn't want in production code. So let's not do that. I don't want to do that. Okay. So the next question is, why, when I did the build, let me just try and do it one more time, just to show you. Why, when I do the npm run build right here, why did it add the test folder now? Because it didn't do that before. Before I added a test folder here, it didn't actually add that test folder and source folder in here. It pretty much just put all of these files in the root of the lib. So what's happening? Why is it failing for me right now? That's because the next thing you need to know is, when we're working with this, when we want to start testing, I have to add my test data when I kind of do the build. Okay? So when I do a build locally in my development environment, I have to actually use this file right here. And in order to get the test information in there, I have to include the test folder as well. Let me just try and remove it just to show you. If I remove this test folder right here, and I go to my test code now, you'll see I start getting errors, because now it actually doesn't understand that these are tests. So it doesn't work anymore. Okay? So I need to go down and include this in my tsconfig. You have to understand that your IDE, in our case WebStorm, whenever you do a save, it'll compile the code using this file right here. Okay, so it'll actually use this config file to compile your code. And I have to explain to that system that I also want my test folder to be in that code. I know this is kind of complex, but just follow along. I'm just trying to explain to you some dev information right here, when you some DevOps information, because it's rather important that you guys start also understanding the entire setup of actually how your code is built, how your code is written in the TypeScript solution we have right here. So think of it this way. Whenever I press save, I'm just trying to do something right here. If I go in here and I do a space, I press save. What's actually happening in my IDE is it goes down here, opens this file pretty much, and says, okay, I'm going to build everything in these two folders now, using the build command that I have right here in the package.json file. So I'm going to run the command up here, tsc. I'm going to build everything. And in order to do that, I'm going to use this configuration file to build everything. That's what's happening. Okay. That's a problem because when I do a build here, I don't want the test files to be included. But when I do a build on development right here, I do want the test files to be included because I want to test locally. I don't want to test in the cloud when I do a production build. So in order to fix this, what I did is I created a new tsconfig file called basic.json. Now this config file is the one that was actually originally available. So your original config file would look something like this, just to show you. This would be how the original config file would look, where you have compiler options. There's a lot of information here about how we should compile and where we should put the source code when we're done compiling. And there is some extensions if you want to use those, and that's the stuff I'm going to show you in a second. That actually wasn't there probably in the old solution. And then there's what you want to include in your compile time. I now need two different config files. I need a config file for development in my IDE, the one that's going to be executed every time I do a save. And then I'm going to need a config file when I want to actually build stuff and send it to Firebase. Let me just try and undo this again and just go back to my basics. So I put everything that all my config files need into this file right here. So again, this is the basic stuff that all my file needs. They need to have some compile options, and you could go and change these. There's a lot of guides about how you can, if you want to change this, you can go and check it out. If you want to change the directory you're saving your data into, when you're done, you could say, I don't want to go to lib. I want to put my data in the dist folder. If you want to do that, just like we used to in Angular, then you would also have to change this, because now you're going to look for the index file in the dist folder, right? So you could go and do that if you want to. I'm just going to keep the basic configuration for that part. There's a lot of other things you can change, like do you want to use a source map? Do you want to be strict? Do you want to target ECMAScript 2017 and stuff like that? There's a lot of change you can make here, but these are the basic configurations for, if I don't care if I'm on, if I'm doing my IDE right now, I'm actually sending production code right now, I want to use these basic settings. So I created a basic JSON file right here. Then the cool thing is that any other JSON files, the config files, can actually extend that basic file, meaning that they're going to get all the information from the basic file, right? And then I can extend that file just like you would with any object-oriented programming. You could then extend your classes, right? I will extend it and say, when I'm running this file right here with my IDE, so when I'm running inside my WebStorm right here, I want to include both the source and the test folder. But when I want to build something, I have a different JSON file where I only include the source folder. So what I've done is pretty much just I've split up two different scenarios. I want to use this for running locally inside my IDE, and I want to use this when I'm doing an npm run build. I want to use this one, okay? But I'm not done yet, because now I need to explain to the package.json file that when I'm running this command right here, I don't want to use this basic script right here that will always be used basically. So this one will always be used when you're running TSC without any information. Automatically what happens is it'll say, I'll look for tsconfig JSON file and I'll use that one. That just happens behind the scene. But we can luckily change that, and that's what I'm doing with this extra set of data right here. I'm saying, when you build, I want you to use this config file and not the basic config file. Okay, so I know again this is complex, but I think it's good if you guys start diving into your config files and just at least a package.json, get an overview about what it's all about, and then start looking into these config files just to have some fun and learn a little bit about them. Because right now it's really not rocket science. I'm saying when I'm running the build command right here, instead of using this file that includes both source and test, I'm going to use this file that only includes source. And that means that when I run the command now, let me just delete the lib. There we go. If I run npm run build now, you'll notice that I'm actually, instead of using the old file that I showed you in the beginning, I'm actually ending up now with a lib that contains the structure that Firebase expects. So that's pretty cool. Now I can do a deploy like we're used to Firebase, and everything is running like you're used to. So that's why it's pretty amazing, because now I can do an npm. I actually have, again, if you go back to the package.json file, notice all these beautiful commands you have available from the beginning. And notice they actually made a deploy function for you right here, a script for that. So I can actually write npm run deploy, and it'll actually automatically try to deploy this to Firebase with only functions. So they kind of prepared that for you, and that's pretty amazing. Now, npm is not spelled nom, just to let you know. It's spelled npm, luckily, so that's why it failed. There we go, run deploy. And now notice what it's actually doing is it's saying Firebase deploy only functions. So now it's actually deploying to Firebase. And notice another thing, it calls in that deploy, it actually calls this one to kind of build the project again. And if you notice, if I go back, you'll notice that this one is actually now using the tsconfig build JSON, because it's this file now. So it only deploys with the source and not the test folder. And I think this is very important for you to know, because I found a lot of guides out there that did different hacks, maybe because they didn't understand the idea behind actually deploying this correctly, because they ended up sending their test folders in the production environment. And it's not a huge catastrophe or anything, but I just don't feel that it's necessary unless you have something running up there taking care of integration testing or something like that, where it does testing in the cloud, like unit testing, something like that. But again, I feel that's something your GitHub should take care of. I don't feel that's something you should deploy to Firebase, to be honest. Now I expect that all of you kind of have a general idea about the different files and the setup that I created to kind of get up and running with this test setup. But I'm not quite done yet, because you also, of course, need to set up Jest in order to start using Jest in your system. And I actually did a few more things to get started with Jest that I didn't talk about last time. First of all, I followed the Jest guide, and in the Jest guide, they encourage you to go in and create, in the package.json, just something right here called Jest. And that's kind of the configuration for Jest. So there's a lot of things right here going on, but it's kind of explaining how we use a transform, the preprocessor of Jest. It's explaining where to look for the different test files, and then it's explaining what we want to test, right? So in this case, we have a TS, TSX, and JS files. That's what we want to. That's the files we're looking for. I also follow other guides, and they encourage you to kind of get rid of this. So I'm going to do that now. I'll get rid of this Jest, and then instead put your configuration for Jest inside a Jest config file like this. So that's kind of what I've done. It's very simple. I'm just creating a Jest config.js file right here, and putting in module exports. I can then share that Jest file with the world. But now it's not inside the package.json file, it's just been moved into its own small configuration file. And when Jest is running, it'll then find this configuration. And again, in my case, I think the most important thing to understand is this part right here. I'm looking for my tests inside the test folder, and I just want to find anything that ends with test in the name. Like, let me try and open my files. So notice right here, it ends with the name test right here. So it contains test or spec. Some people call their test file spec instead. You also see that in Angular. But we call them test right here in my code. I called them test. And again, I'm looking for extensions with TypeScript, TSX, JS, JSX, JSON, Node. So there's a lot of different files I can look for. So you need to set that up. You need to have some kind of configuration, either as they do in the guide, you can do it inside the package.json directly, or you can kind of move it into its own config file. And I do that because I don't want my package.json to be polluted with anything that I'm doing. So instead, I'm moving it inside its own file to kind of have Jest in its own separate library. So that was the first thing I had to do. The next thing I had to do was add a few packages to start using Jest. And in the dev dependencies, I added these two packages, Jest and TS Jest. Those are the ones I kind of reference on Moodle. So if I go to Moodle right here, you'll see that I added these two libraries for you. Let me just try and jump back. New page. I added the mock and the jest. So this one, the jest TS right here, is they have a guide on how to install it using npm. And if I scroll down and try and see it, if I can find it for you, there it is. npm install. There it is. npm install jest TS. And then notice it also requires that you have installed jest and Typescript before you do that. So you have to kind of run these two commands right here to get started. And if you don't want to run them separately like this, you can just add everything in a single command. So let me just try and show you. I'll copy this, go back to my console, and I'll just remove Typescript because I already have that installed. And then I'll just add these two as well. There we go. So this would be the command I would run to kind of install the jest part. And the -d means that I want to put them in dev dependencies, not inside dependencies. Okay, so that's why I got types jest. That's the one you see right here. I got jest and ts jest. Those are the ones you see right here. So I run this command to install all of this, and then I can get started. I also added two more, the create spy object and mock extend, but I'm going to get rid of those so you don't have to install those, because instead, as I told you last time, I started using this mock TS to kind of have the same reference that we do in our old C# program. So I actually don't need these two anymore. I could just get rid of them if I don't want to use them anymore. When I have these installed and I have my config file, I'm actually ready to try and run jest. And the way you do it is pretty much just by writing the command. Oh, I think I was in the wrong directory. Yeah, let's try and write just. Okay, I was in the wrong directory. And actually, I think even though that was kind of annoying, again, remember to get into the right directories when you're working on these things, because it is looking for specific config files in the specific directory you're running in. So that was why I failed right here, because I was actually inside this directory and that didn't contain a jest config file. So that's why it actually failed for me. Let me just try and show you again. If I write jest, whoops, if I write jest right here, after adding those different packages, it should be able to just run the command, and you'll notice that it actually puts in coverage. But you can also specify that you want that or you don't want that by adding the extra information that you can see inside the package.json file right here. So -- coverage like this to kind of add that code coverage in your code. And then you can also say -- watch all for it to keep running. And again, notice now I have to remember all these commands, and that's again why we want to do it instead with these small helpers right here to kind of just do an npm run test and then watch. Then it'll have this exact command right here and run everything for me. So that's what it takes to get up and running with jest, right? That's what it takes to get jest into your system. Now, to start using jest, we are going to try and test a service. We are going to try and add our first test. By the way, if you notice, TSLint is also running right here and complains that I'm not using times right now. I'm not using the service right now. So I also fail with TSLint when I'm running my test actually. And notice that right now, since I did the watch, it'll keep running tests every time you press save. So that's a pretty good way to do test-driven development in your code. Let's just start out by adding the it right here to kind of get started with our test. So this is my first test, and what do I want to test? So this one is this test right here is going to be for me to prove that when I'm calling, when I'm buying a product, which I'm going to just in the product service create a simple function called buy, then it should have added 1 to times purchased, right? So that's what I wanna build. And right now it fails for multiple reasons. One is that these guys aren't used. I can just get rid of this one for now. And this one I need to start using it. the product service. So the first thing I want to do is I want to say, I want to make a new one. I want to make a buy function. And I want to buy a product. And I'm just going to pass in the product right there. I won't do anything else right now. Notice right here, it should fail now. And again, that's the way you do test-driven development, right? You should make your tests fail, and then later on, you'll make them pass. So this fails right now. And the first reason it fails is, of course, I don't have the method. So let's just generate the method. Whoops. I'll create the method buy. It passes in a product, and then it should, that product should be accumulated times purchases with 1. Let's go back. You'll notice now my test actually passes. That's because I'm not done yet. Because I want this buy to actually return the product again. So I want this to be a const product of the type product. And, oh, it shouldn't be product after, like this. And you'll notice that it can't convert void into product. So there's a new error. So let's go back to my buy function. Of course, this guy should then return the product like this. And right now it doesn't return a product. So I need to update my code to return product. There we go. Back to my test. Now that use case is a-okay, but I'm not using this product after for anything right now. So let's actually go in and say, I expect that my product after, I expect that to actually be one more than it was before I actually called this method. So let's just first of all create a new constants right here. Before purchased, that's equal to the product dot times purchased. So now I have the value before it's actually purchased. So this should be 0 right now, because notice right here, this is the object I'm using. And then of course I expect after this buy has been called, it should then count this up once, right? So now the after purchase, let's just try and put it in here just to make it very simple to see. Purchased should of course now be 1 more than what it was before. So that's kind of my goal right here. That is to kind of prove that these two, that this one has been added, right? So it has been added with 1 more. How to do that? Well, I need to figure out how I can actually use jest to make an assert. So it seems they have something called expect. Let's try and use that one. So I'll say expect, and then I'll say before purchased, after purchased, to be 1. That's actually my test right here. And I can also do an expect up here. I expect the before purchased to be 0. Like this. Oh. So this is kind of my test saying that it should add 1. I expect that before the times purchased is 0, and after the call, the time, this one should be 1, right? I get an error, so let's try and see. So it says expected 1, but we actually got 0. So again, we have a red test. That's what we're looking for. Let's try and go into our buy function. And of course, what we should do is we should say product dot times purchased equals product dot times purchased plus 1. And then you can go on yourself and play around with different ways of setting up this if you want to. It's really up to you. But now you can see my test passes. So now I know that this guy should actually work. Okay. And now we can start doing some of the more fun tests, like what if I did the same thing, buying a product with undefined value, So now I'll try and send undefined in here and see what happens. I'm probably not allowed to do that. So let's just try and put null. Is that allowed? So this is actually not even possible, right? Because it wants a product, so you can't do it without a product. But let's just send in an empty object. And then hopefully again, TypeScript guards us. Right? So we are still guarded. Perfect. Let's try and add a new object right here where we go in and we actually say times purchased is undefined. Can we do that? So that's not allowed either. Let's try and say null as any. What? Undefined. Yeah, that's a trick. So maybe we are not guarded at all. What did we get? Cannot read type purchased of undefined. Whoops. Right? So we're not as well guarded as we expected, right? It does throw an exception. That's fine. But let's say instead should not throw an exception. Maybe we want to handle it somehow, right? So we send in an undefined product. Can we handle it? Let's try and go to the buy function. So first of all, we can say if product. So if there is a product, we want to do this, right? And we can even be more specific. If product and no, let's actually keep it like this for now. And then here we can return undefined like this. So now we are, and again, you can do it as any, just to trick TypeScript. So now we are kind of, we're not getting an exception, but we are getting back undefined. And it's up to you if you feel that's a good way to solve it. You could, of course, also throw new exceptions yourself and make an exception system like we did in third semester. It's really up to you how you want to handle it. But I just want to kind of show you guys that you can actually slowly evolve your system and you can guard yourself from different scenarios. It still failed. And that's because in my test, when I get back, I actually still use times purchased, but that's not what I should expect now with my new test. It should actually expect that the product after to be or not to be undefined. Can I say that? Yeah. Okay, so you have all these helper methods in the expect. There's a lot of things you can do. You can just check out these different ones. You can go read about all of this. There's so much to talk about right here. You can test if things are false or true, not a number, null, blah, blah, blah. You can keep going. There's a lot of things. Let's just save this and see if that helped my system. I have 3 passed right now. So notice the cool thing about this test-driven development is that every time I do a save, all my tests are being run. So if I by mistake in my buy function right here, let's say in order to fix this right here, I actually by mistake, I know this is kind of a dumb one, but by mistake I put in 12 right here because I was changing my code for fixing this undefined problem. Right away, notice you get, oops, the other test is failing now. So buying a product adds 1 to times purchased is failing now because it got 12, not 1. So let's just go back to my test. Oh yeah, it's this test. Oh my God, I did something horribly wrong in the changes I made in the buy function. Let's just undo that. Right, so the cool thing is you keep getting feedback every time you do a single line of code.